Hi, and thank you for tuning into my channel. I am Shatina C. Barr. I am an author and a mental health therapist in the state of New York. And today's presentation is going to be in regards to the first book that I published, The Spirit of a Sound Mind. So I'm going to show you the book. Okay, this is the front matter of the book. And so today we're going to go through what this book represents from literally cover to cover, as well as the content within the book. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, I want to ask you to do so that you can be in the know and informed of additional content that is going to be produced on this channel. It is my desire to be able to have this channel flooded with information that is practical to you. So it will be presentations, there will be interviews, anything that I feel is appropriate that represents what I stand for, that I think can help the viewers out there. The channel is going to be flooded with that type of information. So please feel free to subscribe so that you can be in the know about that. Listen, if this video blesses you, share it with somebody else. Why keep it to yourself when the people that you know can be benefited from this information as well? You can purchase this book and another book that I wrote, which I'll talk about in a few seconds, on westbowpress.com, barnesandnobles.com, or amazon.com. If you have purchased the book already, consider purchasing it for someone else. So the time frame that I'm doing this particular video is during the COVID pandemic, which, you know, we know is affecting the whole world, not just the United States of America where I am, but it is affecting the whole world. This is a great time. This is a great opportunity to help someone be able to read something that's inspiring yet informative, thought-provoking, and challenging all at the same time, okay? If you are in counseling, or if you know someone in counseling and you want to better support them, or you want to get a better understanding of how you can be even more informed in your own therapy, this will be a great tool for you to have. If you are an instructor, okay, I want to make particular emphasis here. If you are an instructor, more than likely your classes have shifted from literally meeting in the classroom to an online classroom platform. Please feel free to read the book and perhaps even consider using it as a recommended or a required reading in your classes. This book is written across professions, meaning that it touches upon many of the social sciences domains. So, you know, clearly social work, as I am a social worker, my undergraduate degree was in psychology, as well as philosophy. So I talk about, and I would also say psychiatry as well. I discuss Freud, I discuss Plato, I discuss B.F. Skinner, you know, I discuss the social work roots in terms of how social work had developed, you know, and then how it evolved. So it is a very comprehensive read in that way. It is not meant to be exhaustive, so I don't refer to, you know, every theorist, but I do hit on a lot of the major theorists or founding fathers in particular domains to make the point that I feel relevant in this particular read. But please, if you are not a professor, if you are not in therapy, if you do not know anyone receiving therapy, do not let that be a discouragement to you. You can still glean something from this book. Listen, if you are agnostic, if you are atheist, if you don't believe in God, if you're unsure about God, if you're angry with God, this book is for you. Why? Because hopefully when you read this book, you will be able to see things from a different perspective. Maybe it'll help you think along a different type of lines. Maybe it'll show you a different angle on the same problem that you've been dealing with. You never know. So just have an open mind to it and see if there's any information that you can glean from it. I would love to hear from you. I absolutely would love to know what your thoughts are. In the description of this particular video, there'll be some contact information. My website will be there, as well as my email address, but I'll shout it out here. My website address is www.thebarpractice.org. My email address is S, my first initial, Barr, my last name, at thebarpractice.org. So please feel free to shoot me an email if you have questions about this presentation, or if you want to get information to me about counseling services. So if you are in the state of New York and you are interested in therapy, please contact me and we will see how we can accommodate your needs. The first step is to do an intake, and then we go ahead and take it from there to make sure that your particular needs are, at the appropriate level with regards to outpatient services. So now I want to begin this particular presentation with a scripture. But before I do so, I do want to just mention my other book. So this is another book that I wrote. This is called The ABCs of My Journey, Commemorating 40 Years of Faith. Last year I turned 40, and I wrote a book in addition to some other things that I had at a faith conference, and it was really impactful. And so in addition to the conference, at the conference, I released this particular book, which was super exciting for me. And so this book is written devotional style, the 40 Years of Faith, that is. And what I mean by that is I laid out various about 26, 27 life principles that I learned eclectically over these 40 years that I have been blessed to be alive. And at the end of each experience, I concluded it with a scripture. Now, again, please don't be turned off by that. If you're not a Christian, again, if you have an open mind, just consider purchasing it, thinking about the word, seeing if it helps shape your worldview. Again, you never know. So I would encourage you to use that. It is a great tool. Again, with everything that's going on with COVID right now, a lot of people are staying at home trying to get caught up on certain things. This will be the great opportunity to purchase this book for yourself or for someone else. Hey, have book talks around it, have small circle sessions around it where you can process it, glean the information, want to hear from you and know what your thoughts are about that. You can use the same contact information to reach out to me about that particular book as well. So now, going into an overview of the Spirit of a Sound Mind. So the title, The Spirit of a Sound Mind, is derived from a scripture, 2 Timothy 1:7, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and of a sound mind. And so what is a sound mind? I talk about that in the epilogue of the book. So the intent of this presentation is to give you an overview of the book, to endear you to want to purchase the book, or to just have additional information in how you formulate your thoughts about, faith and mental health and things of that nature, even if you don't have a chance to purchase the book. Although I will say, if you have a smartphone, you can get a free preview of the book in Google Play or in iBooks. So you literally don't have a reason to not have access to the book in some form. But what is a sound mind? A sound mind, simply put, is a balanced mind. It's a balanced mind. And so that's what the front cover represents. We have to have balance in our life. And what do I mean by that? I mean, specifically, from my perspective as a clinician, we are created, we have a body, and we also have an immaterial part of us, which is our mind, our soul, our desires, our emotions. And so when we're thinking about how do I stay in balance? It's not just about going to the gym, and it's not only about trying to think right thoughts, but I do propose in this book that created in the image of God, which I do believe that we have to be able to recognize when we have a void in that area. And now here again, please, if you're watching this and if you're not a faith person, please don't check out on me right here. Just stay with me to the rest of this presentation to see if there's something I said that causes you to think about things a little bit differently. Because this is the fact of the matter. Whether you believe something or not, whether you believe God is real or not, whether you believe that you need him or not, that doesn't change the fact, from my perspective, that he is real and that you may need him. And again, I say that very humbly because it's not my intent to offend anyone. I know a lot of people that have been hurt or that have experienced trauma in their life, they have questions. And when they don't feel like faith is answering their questions, for many people, that is a major way in which it can cause them to question faith, and in some instances fall away from faith. Not everyone who says that they are not practicing their faith is practicing it in God. So people, in other words, people do have faith, but they may not be practicing it in God. They may be more reliant on themselves. But what I would want to say is this, and I know that when people have been hurt, it feels safer to trust in self than it does in a God that they can't see. But I want to say this, even in trusting in self, we're fallible. We don't always do everything the way that we say that we're going to do. We let our own selves down. We are not without flaw. Now, so if we're going to put our trust in ourselves, we have to realize that too, that we're going to let our own selves down. We're going to let other people down because we're not perfect. And so there is the position that when we have faith, that there are going, and we put our faith in God, that there are going to be things that happen that we can't always explain, such as this COVID pandemic. Many people have different views on why this is happening, but for people who are looking for answers in particular, it hurts even more. And so it can be used to as an opportunity sometimes to push people away from God instead of towards Him. But I just want to say that if you are hurting and if you are looking for answers, please don't close yourself off to God. Let this presentation be a means in which you just are open to some things that maybe you had been closed off to or that you had never opened yourself up to before. Everything happens for a reason. And so it was my experience, maybe not everyone's, but it was my experience that in undergraduate school as well as in graduate school, that there was not a lot of presentation in terms of class content or curriculum content in regards to how to speak to faith and clinical practice. There was a gap there. And for me, that was, I question that, because when I think about the risk assessments as an example that we were trained to construct, in a comprehensive risk assessment or safety plan, which are instruments that a clinician would use when his or her client is presenting as having thoughts of self-harm or displaying some type of high-risk behavior. When you're doing a comprehensive plan, you always want to know what type of natural supports or supports that individuals have outside of the therapy session can they glean from. And so in the construction of those risk assessments or safety plans, oftentimes if it was a comprehensive one, matters of faith would come up, such as what particular temple or parish or church did they go to, if they found that supportive. So one of the questions that I began to derive is, if discussing faith is important in the construction of a safety plan or a risk assessment, why is it then not important enough to train clinicians on that in their content? So there's a big gap there, regardless of what profession a clinician may be in, whether it's psychiatry, psychology, licensed mental health counselor, marriage and family therapist, clinical social work, the highest level, or a physician for that matter, the highest level of care is regarding safety. It's regarding safety. So a safety plan, a plan to keep an individual safe, you can't get any higher level of attention that is needed than with that. And so if on that highest level of care, in terms of an instrument or a document, we are addressing faith, why is it not significant enough to train clinicians in so they can understand if you are presented with a client who is of this particular faith, this is why it is important to them. This is the tenets or component of their faith. It is meeting the client where he or she is. It is not appropriate, in my opinion, to say, well, because I don't believe in God or because I don't think God is real, I'm not going to meet my client and become educated enough on what their particular faith means to them. And so this book is meant to do my part as a Christian to outline a way in which it can be the beginning stages or the beginning works or add to the body of work, though it may be skim in regards to how to develop faith-based, evidence-based interventions to help clients with. This is the role of the spirit of a sound mind to add to that body of work to do so. Okay, so when we're thinking about why this is relevant, why this particular is relevant, why is it relevant in the social sciences, why is it relevant in classroom content, because clinicians should be trained and understand why Christian faith is important to their Christian clients. Okay, The book concludes with the what is next chapter, meaning where do we go from here? How do we make sure that the gap is being bridged? So you can do your part to help me bridge that gap by, again, if you are an instructor, read the book, consider sharing it with some of your students in your classroom. You can make it a required reading, a recommended reading if you feel it's appropriate. You can contact me to do presentations. I would absolutely love to have those discussions. At the end of each chapter, I conclude with a case scenario of how over my years, which I have over 10 years of direct clinical experience, meaning over 10 years I have been working directly with clients and providing therapy. And so it concludes with some of the highlights of cases that I had came across previously, working with clients who expressed the faith, or how their faith affected or impacted, interfaced with their treatment. So we can't get around the fact that people do have faith, and oftentimes things that are core to people, they don't necessarily want to separate when they're receiving services. If we think about it from a medical profession, when a patient is getting ready to die, who do they ask them, do they want to talk to? Do you want to have your priest or your pastor come in? Because the recognition of their faith, if they have one, is being advocated for. So it's not about whether the physician feels that he or she has to have faith. It's about what's in the best interest of that patient. And so they offer that to that patient, because they recognize that even though medically they may be failing, that they may have a faith that they still want to practice by exercising. Their priest or their pastor or their rabbi come and do a prayer, or their imam have them come and provide some comfort to them in some sort of way. So we really do, as a clinical field, have to begin to become more comprehensive in how we look at balancing faith and the clinical world. The back matter of the book, which is also very important, because it highlights some aspects of counseling that I unfold for people. So I'm just going to read a little bit of this. It's Mark 14:32-34, and it says, Jesus told his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James, and John with him. He plunged into a sinkhole of dreadful agony. He said to them, "I feel bad enough to die." That scripture, those few sentences, are just loaded with information and perspective and principles. And so I just highlighted a few principles that I wanted to discuss for the purpose of this presentation. So what do we see? We see that Jesus, who is the central figure for Christianity, and he's also a central figure in the Abrahamic faith, such as Judaism, as well as the Islamic faith. We have different emphasis on where we place with Jesus. So from the Christian perspective, Jesus is God's son, and he is the center of what is needed for mankind to be redeemed. Again, different faiths view his role differently, but do recognize him. But from the Christian perspective, so we see that Jesus confided in his disciples. So as a principle, what I take from that is we all need someone to talk to. Many times people feel that it is an assault upon their particular strength or perception of abilities if they need to talk to someone. It doesn't take away from your strength that you need to, talk to someone. Again, Jesus confided in his apostles, when he was very overwhelmed because he was getting ready to be crucified. And so what I say to people is, it's not the people that are identifying that they're having difficulties that I'm concerned about. I'm always concerned about the individuals who will not talk about what they're going through, who will not identify that they have limitations, because you cannot deal with what you will not discuss. You literally cannot really manage it. And if you do try to manage it in isolation or in a vacuum, oftentimes that may not be as helpful. Okay, so the second principle that I want to say is that Jesus initiated discussion on his feelings, which I think is also very important because it shows that not only did he have the ability to identify people within his circle that he could confide in, he also initiated the discussion. So he didn't wait until, they came to him and had to pry out of him what was wrong. And sometimes, as people, we're not very comfortable with initiating, discussion on what our needs are. And that's not a judgment, it's just an observation. But it is to say that sometimes we need to be able to say, you know what, I really do need to talk. And I can appreciate the fact that, some of you may be feeling like, well, I don't have a social circle or anyone that I can confide in, or, so because I don't have anyone that I can talk to, I can't initiate that discussion. I would love to talk to someone. Well, there is help that is available. Again, if you are in New York State, I'm not saying that I'm the only clinician, but I am a source that you can, consider going to. There are national support lines that are available, which I'll go over one of those at the end of the presentation today. There are literally so many opportunities and platforms that we can utilize to confide and to talk in. So no, it may not be your mom, it may not be your dad, it may not be your cousin, it may not be someone that you're familiar with or someone that you would have preferred to talk to, but there are opportunities and outlets for you to find someone who you can confide in. So sometimes we have to accept the help as it comes, okay? Jesus was honest and transparent about how he felt. One of the things that I've learned in my time of doing therapy, clients that are willing to honestly identify and discuss and work through their, presenting needs, these individuals oftentimes utilize treatment more effectively because they are being transparent and honest about what they're dealing with. I work with a variety of individuals. I have over the years. So, I oftentimes encourage my clients, please don't feel as though you need to have, any kind of social desirability going on where you don't really present what you're dealing with because you want me to see you in a particular light because of your profession or, things of that nature. Jesus was the Son of God, and yet he humbled himself to be honest, to say what he was dealing with. If he was able to humble himself, and again, even if you're not a Christian, if you are Muslim or if you are Jewish, just look at from the role that you respect Jesus in. Look at the fact that he unveiled himself, as it were, and was able to just really be honest. And if he was able to be honest and set that example, then why do we feel as though we can't be honest? Sometimes we struggle because we put more burdens on ourselves than what was intended to. So he admitted the full extent. So he was completely honest. He did not, seem to be holding back. He completely told them what he was going through. There does come a point in time where we just really have to acknowledge individuals and say, this is really what I'm dealing with. And yes, you have to be mindful of who you share that information with. It's not appropriate to just share that with everyone. But you can, again, with diligence and with supports, vetting out some appropriate and professional resources, you can make a good fit to find that individual, that support group that you can connect with so that you can be fully transparent and get the support that you need. Okay, so thus far, that was just an overview of the front cover and of the back matter. We are now transitioning into the actual chapter content of the book. So in chapter 1, I discussed faith and education, which I touched upon this a little bit before in terms of the safety planning. So what I want to emphasize here is that when I would talk to, say, for instance, instructors or educators on, being able to use this book in a classroom setting, a lot of times what was then given to me in terms of feedback as to why they didn't think it was doable was the separation between church and state. So I want to just have a little discussion here. So what is the clause on the separation between church and state? So what it literally says in the Constitution is that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Okay, so essentially what that is saying is and mind you, this is a clause that is debatable. So we have, attorneys that literally go to court and litigate this out, because there are various positions on how this clause can be interpreted. So right there, from my perspective, that is not saying that I, as a social worker, am somehow restricted from saying that I believe in God, I believe in the Bible, and from that perspective, this is how I believe it can inform clinical work. What that clause, what I interpret it to say, and someone else may have a different interpretation of it, which is again why it's litigated out and debated, is that the government shall not make a law respecting religion, but not that me as a private citizen or as a professional can't say, what I feel or how I think it can inform practice. So, people obviously think that they're contradicting that point and saying, well, if you have, credentials which, come from, some form of, a governing body that can be linked to, seeming as if it's government representation, or if someone is literally a employee of the government, that, for them to state their faith, that's somehow linked to the government then having an overreach and establishing religion, which again, I don't necessarily see it that way. And I go back to, if a patient is dying, does not the physician allow for that particular person's respected faith leader to come and to offer prayer to them? So conceptually, how is it different? How is it different from a clinician saying, I have a client who is Jewish and they want to talk about, what the Torah means to them, or they want to talk about, their faith. How is my becoming informed of that? And then how is an instructor who is informed of that, allowing the perspective of their potential client to be taught? How is that representing an overreach when it is about the client? It is not the learning institution. It is not the professor saying that a client has to have this particular faith. It is not the government saying that a client has to have a particular faith. It is literally the employee of the institution saying that I want to be an informed practitioner. I want to be an informed instructor, and to do so, I need to understand a different perspective. And so it's very interesting how some perspectives are promoted and are endorsed as it's okay to teach this and it's okay to understand that, but when it comes down to faith liberties, or again what even seems to be very natural for the client, that there are limitations put upon it. And I just don't believe that the founding fathers intended it. Thomas Jefferson, I believe, wrote this particular clause. I don't believe that that was the intent, to say that if you as an employee wanted to become informed and understand what your the knowledge base of the person that you were going to be helping, that if you took an informed perspective of that somehow was an overreach of that. So that's my interpretation of it. So there is case law to support how these things actually have played out in court. So separationism versus accommodationism. So separationism is the stance that people would take where they say, nah, I don't believe that, there should be any, sort of discussion or talk on, faith with regards to, government related or, educational institutions. And so literally the case that I'm referring to in terms of case law is Zorak versus Claussen, which was a case in 1952 where the courts ruled in favor of students leaving their secular school for religious education for a part of the day. And so that would be, the ruling of that would be in favor of accommodationism, to where, the government makes accommodations. Not that it prefers one religion over another, but it makes accommodations relatively equally amongst, particular religions. So, I would be in favor of accommodationism. I mean, obviously, if it was whatever the situation is, it would need to be understood what it looked like, and, that there were no violent tendencies associated with that. But, I tend to think that accommodationism is the more appropriate stance that, again, those in the educational curriculum can take, because it is really about potential clinicians or what would be clinicians being trained and being able to understand what their particular client's faith means to, him or her. Chapter 1 also discusses self-harm and suicide in the Bible. So self-harm is different from suicidal ideation. Self-harm is not always an attempt to end life. Some people who engage in self-harm behaviors are, trying to relieve distress or pain, and so that's why they engage in those particular behaviors. Self-harm or self-mutilation is not new in terms of it being a behavior. It is also recorded in the Bible, and I'll just give you a reference for that. The particular reference is 1 Kings 18 through 28, and it reads, "So they cried aloud and cut themselves, as was their custom, with knives and lances until blood gushed out on them." I'm obviously not promoting self-harm or self-mutilation. As a clinician, it's not an effective way to manage emotions, and frankly, it can actually weaken people's responses in terms of their coping skills, because the more that they believe they're deriving the benefit that they want from that, they can then begin to engage in self-mutilating behaviors more often, which obviously that's not a good way to cope with life stressors. So the purpose, however, though, in showing that it is referenced in the Bible is because it indicates that this was a custom, it was a practice that was going on even in biblical times. And so for individuals, here again, who are, say, for instance, of a, faith, a Christian faith, or, they believe in the Bible, even if they're not actively practicing their faith, how endearing is it to know that some of the things that we as individuals go through, that it is not unique to us. One of the things that support groups offer is the shared perspective that you are not alone. So when individuals understand that you may have the thought, or you may have engaged in some self-harm or some self-mutilation behaviors, God is aware that people have used that to try to cope. But then the other aspect of it is, how can you cope more effectively? A lot of times people are shamed into not discussing what they feel, because they feel that if they identify what they're going through, or if they talk about what they're going through, that this somehow means that they don't have faith, or that there's just something that is just deeply wrong with them, flawed as individuals, when that is not the case. The Bible says that there is literally nothing new under the sun. So there's nothing new that you're dealing with. No matter how you may cope with it, no matter how embarrassed or ashamed you may be with what you've done to cope, the Bible says there's nothing new under the sun. And so this is one of the reasons why I think it very clinically responsible actually for clinicians to understand how to meet the needs of any of their prospective Christian clients, because I have research that I cited in my book that says Christian-based forms of cognitive behavioral therapy have been effective when used in the clinical sessions. And so if someone is using, regardless to the fact if they are a Christian or not, if a clinician is using an evidence-based form of a Christian intervention and it is effective, why would we not want to offer that? And the only way we can really understand why it is necessary is when we value the faith of our clients, when we value that it may not be meaningful to the clinician, but it is meaningful for their client. And so then if it's meaningful for the client, then we trace it back. So how can I understand what is an evidence-based, faith-based practice? Well, we have to begin somewhere. So that's why I'm so passionate about this book and about the content, because we want to be able to meet people where they are, and for the people that are open to this particular form of therapy, and can offer them great hope. And that's what therapy is all about. Regardless to the intervention that you're using, you do want your clients to become functional and independent to the extent that they can, and cope effectively, and have some balanced sense of hope for their future, some sense of, to whatever extent they can, whatever that would look like for them. Not everybody's end outcome is going to be the same, so we're not trying to sell something, but we're just saying that whatever your life is, whatever your highest version of yourself is destined to be, let's offer you some tools so that you can get to that destined end for you. Okay. Also, in the book, when we talk about suicide, so suicide is different from self-harm. As I mentioned, with self-harm, people are not necessarily trying to take their lives, but the undesirable outcome is that depending upon, how they're self-mutilating, they can in fact actually end up taking their life unintentionally, as it were. Suicide is when people have actually made the decision that they want to end their life, and they have a plan to actually bring that, to pass. And so again, whether it's, self-harm being recorded in the Bible, we have instances in the Bible where it is recorded where people did commit suicide, such as Judas. Judas Iscariot was one of the fallen apostles who turned his back on Christ and actually betrayed him, and so he committed suicide. We have other presentations in the Bible where people were wanting to die, even if they did not actually take their own life. So in Jonah 4:3, Jonah was a prophet and was frustrated and angry with God. And it's interesting how anger can lead us to a place, dark places that we oftentimes don't want to be. Jonah's anger has so consumed him that he actually requested of God that he would die. He was so angry with God. So again, I want to just have a plug here for someone who's atheist or someone who is agnostic. Maybe you didn't know that there were people recorded in the Bible that were so angry with God because of their decisions. A lot of people have been recorded to be angry with God because they didn't understand his methodologies. They didn't understand what he was doing. And so for Jonah, he was particularly vexed because he did not think that a nation of people deserved to be forgiven. He felt as if their lifestyles had been corrupt and didn't think that they were worth forgiving. And so when God instructed him that he wanted him to, in fact, go deliver a word to these group of people that he was going to forgive them if they repented, Jonah tried to avoid that. He went the complete opposite way of what God told him to, and God had to deal with him. And then after God dealt with him, then Jonah was able to, go ahead and do what he was supposed to do, but his heart wasn't in it. How many times do we do things and our heart is really not in it? Jonah's heart really wasn't in it. And after he got done doing what God had asked him to do, he said, I'm still so angry. He said, I'm angry enough that I could just die right now. And so many people are so hurt. They're so angry. They're so bitter about how their life is gone, about who abused them, who hurt them, who wasn't there for them, who took advantage of them, who is hurting them, who is taking advantage of them, who is ignoring them. And that bitterness and that anger, sometimes it all culminates. And, many times we just take it out on God. God, why did you let this happen? Why did you let my parents be this way? Why if you're so good, why this, why that? And so all that bitterness and all that hurt sometimes comes out in that anger and causes people to distance themselves from God and say, you know what, I don't want to believe, or, I don't want to accept that. I don't want to believe the Bible. I don't want to follow, that particular God. I'd rather follow myself. I can trust myself. Well, I can't say that I can offer you every question about what your particular answers may be. But what I would invite you to do is just consider how, again, the Bible does represent some of the feelings that you are feeling. And I would also say that at the end, of this particular presentation, if you notice that you're thinking about some things differently, then that's positive. That's an indication that maybe something in this presentation spoke to you. Maybe there was something that was offered that you say, yeah, I can see it that way, or I didn't think about it that before. Okay? The Bible does offer answers to help guide us as humans. And when we don't find every particular answer to every particular question that we want, that is where I will honestly say and admit our faith has to come into play. And you may say, well, that's not good enough for me. I need answers. Well, I want to say this to you. Science doesn't offer the answers for everything either. And no matter how talented or how smart you are, you still have questions. Your intellect doesn't answer every question to you. Now, as I transition into chapter 2, but still staying on this same point, what I want to say to people who may be watching this, who may think that you're way too smart for faith or for faith in God, and you'd rather trust in science or you'd rather trust in evolution. An evolutionary perspective that indicates or that suggests that God didn't have anything to do with anything, that dust or stardust just began to have various mutations until we are who we are today. Now, I heard someone say before, and I firmly believe with that, it takes more faith for me to believe that I was once, a fish, and I was once, a cow, and this and that, and then evolved to what I am today. It takes more faith for me to believe that than to believe that God, though I don't understand everything about him, created me in his image. It takes more faith for me to believe that. And I do want to suggest this as a personal point of reference. One thing that I put in my book was that from the time I was a little girl, I had dreams that would actually come to pass. Sometimes I would be outside playing kickball and would almost have a feeling of deja vu, and I would have to stop because I would feel like I was re-experiencing something. I later came to recognize it wasn't that I was re-experiencing something, it was that I had dreamt it. Now, in my time of being in college or graduate school or just postgraduate work, just learning, I have yet to understand how prophetic dreams or things of that fit into the grand scheme of evolution. Has anyone tested to see if dogs have dreams? Do bats have dreams? Do whales have dreams? Do giraffes have dreams? Do ants have dreams? Do bees have dreams? Do flies have dreams? Do maggots have dreams? I, as an individual, have dreams. And not just that I have visions when I sleep, but these things have actually happened. Now, the Bible tells me about the gifts of dreams and about how God reveals things to his people through dreams. The Bible offers me that perspective. Evolution doesn't offer me that. So I present this not to attack anyone for what they believe, but just to show that even in being agnostic or atheist, you still don't have all the answers either. So why shut yourself off to God when you don't have all the answers either? Science doesn't have all the answers either. Not exclusively. Is science good? Do we need research? Yes. The Bible speaks of science and the benefit of it, which I reference that in the book as well. But the whole point is, going back to the front matter, we don't need to construct it where it's a this for that. There is a way for faith and science to coexist. And so, some people, may say, well, okay, I'll buy into that. I'll buy into the fact that you want to, do some evidence-based, material for Christianity. Fine, I'll accept that, even if, I don't believe in it. But why are you limiting your book just to the Christian faith? Well, I'm limiting it to the Christian faith for me because I'm a Christian. That does not mean that I don't respect other people's faiths or that I don't, that I don't educate myself on other people's faiths, because I do respect other people's faiths and I do educate myself on it. I just don't, it's just not the faith that I subscribe to. So if someone else wants to do a work on, how, Jewish people need to have their particular needs developed to be met in a clinical practice, or if someone wants to do a particular piece of work, from the perspective of Islam and how you can, help Islamic clients, and if there is a comprehensive manual that's put together, I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with that. It's about meeting clients where they are. It's just that this is my particular contribution from the Christian perspective on why I think it is necessary to be able to have clinicians and providers be aware of the benefit of how they can engage their particular Christian clients and patients. So this is my laying the groundwork for that continuation of work. In chapter 3, I talk about what is mental illness and when did it begin. So according to the Services Administration, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, mental illness is defined as having a diagnosable mental, behavioral, or emotional disorder other than developmental or substance use disorder. So that's the working definition that we're going off of in terms of, mental illness. In terms of it being diagnosable, clinicians use the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistics Manual. We are currently in the 5th revision of that. So that is the manual, which was a collaborative work from a variety of different professions to help look at what is symptomology and when does it meet a clinical threshold, how to do a differential diagnosis as to say, well, maybe they present this way, but we need to rule this out because they don't have this element of the symptomology, but they have that. That's the particular manual where clinicians get their diagnoses from. I argue in the book, and I don't mean that from a negative standpoint, meaning I make the presentation. The first case of mental illness was presented with Adam and Eve. So you have to get the book to read a little bit more about that. But I will say that I've gotten a lot of good feedback from that a lot of people were very inspired to know that, again, there are elements of a mental health presentation in the Bible, the book that they, if they are a Christian, have grown to, go to as a reference, discusses aspects of mental health functioning. Again, it is very comforting to know when you value something that you can actually have practical ways that you can use it. So when we think about, the Bible and these people that we've obviously never met, that lived before, and we think about where we are today in this century, there can be a disconnect if we say, well, you know what, I feel really frustrated with this person, or I feel really frustrated with that person. But or I feel guilty that I feel frustrated with this person. But when we understand, you don't have to feel guilt necessarily behind how you feel, because God understands how you feel. You just have to present to him how you feel, meaning talk to him about how you feel. Ask him to give you the insight to manage your feelings, to identify what is the root issue behind what you feel. So you don't have to stop at feeling guilty. Guilt is a normal emotion and it serves a purpose, but sometimes we misconstrue our feelings and we feel certain things when we shouldn't feel them. But that's a whole nother presentation. What is a mental health status? So we talked about that earlier. A mental health status is basically an assessment or an evaluation of how one's mind is functioning. So a mental health status would have tenets to it, such as how is this person's thinking? Okay, do they have bizarre content? How is this person's affect? Meaning, how is their facial expression? Is it restricted? Is it blunted? What is this person's mood like? What is their memory like? So it goes over, various different ways in which you can assess, or a clinician can assess or evaluate the functionality of someone's mind. Now, that's not seeing if an individual meets criteria for a diagnosis. That's separate. That's just trying to understand someone's mental health status. So one of the common taglines that I say to people, whether it's through a video or whether I'm doing a presentation, the question is not, do you have a mental health status? The question is, what is your mental health status? Just like you have a physical health status, you have a mental health status. So we have to also not buy into stigma that a mental health status or anything with the word mental, are for people who are, on a psychiatric ward or on psychotropic medication. It is not limited to individuals who may be receiving psychopharmacology or psychotherapeutic services. Everyone has a mental health status, okay? So let that be an additional takeaway from this video presentation. You do have a mental health status. It's not a question of if you have one. The question is, what is your mental health status, okay? And so, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not really concerned so much about people that identify they have a mental health status, even if it is a bizarre one, because they're identifying it, and you can work with that to help them get support that they need if they're open to it. But the people who won't admit that they have a mental health status, or they are closed off to even entertaining whether what their status level is, it's a little bit more concerning there, because they may be trying to conceal something, or they may be in denial about something. Okay, denial is a defense mechanism where people in fact don't want to consciously think about something that may be anxiety provoking for them. Okay. When you read the book, you'll see the criteria set that I lay out in terms of why I believe Adam and Eve, the parents in the Bible, were the first presentation of mental illness, because of the criteria set that they met, the functional impairment, as it were. We also see that their dysfunction passed on in the principle of sin or behavioral disorders to their children. So it's important to note that whether you are a parent or whether you have individuals in your life that you are helping mentor or shape and influence in some way, your mental health functioning does impact the people that are around you in one way or another. Either they are like you to varying degrees, or they are so the opposite that they say, I never want to be anything like you. So you want to try to make sure that you are aware, whether you're an adult or not, that your behaviors are impacting and influencing someone else. Chapter 4 and 5, I discuss anti-theism and the social sciences. I combine these two chapters here because there's a bit of an overlap for the purposes of this presentation in terms of ground that we could cover for the overview. One of the things that I put here, which is a very important piece to me as a social worker, one of the reasons why social work spoke to me was it was very connected with my Christian values. Not just the fact that social work developed around sort of charitable causes in terms of the Whole House and things of that nature, but just the aspect of benevolence and wanting to share resources and make sure that there was a sense of community and that needs were being met. So it was very linked or connected to my faith in that way, but in a pursuit to become more valid in the world of professionalism, there was a change that the field of social work went through, and it sort of began to distance itself from more case management or community oriented to a more clinical world. And in that shift, there was the invitation of more theoretic viewpoints that in and of themselves, such as Freud's work, were they were antithetical to the Christian faith. Freud has many works where he did not mince words about what he felt in terms of people who had faith. And so many of the theories that social work built itself on or integrated into its curriculum in terms of child development, human behavior, came from the world of psychology and psychiatry. And so with that, there was then an intertwining of the sort of case management along with this now clinical perspective. And with that clinical perspective then came that sort of again, distancing itself from, the roots of the charitable, ways in which it was formed, to embracing more of this, sort of advanced or clinical perspective. Now, I'm a clinical social worker, so I'm not discrediting the fact that it was not a good transition to be able to develop clinical social work. But what I am saying is that, in my opinion, as a clinical social worker who is a Christian, from my studies and experience of, reading and then practically seeing it in the classroom, there, in some instances, not completely, but it was almost this for that. It was almost, we're going to embrace, these clinical views into this profession, which, because they were antithetical in some ways, there was a distancing from the faith-based or charitable, benevolent roots that it developed. Now, interestingly enough, when I was being educated and, in the classroom or reading, oftentimes I would hear things and I would think, where did I hear that before? And it was concepts from the Bible. So that was very interesting, and I talk about that in the book. One example that I'll give here is B.F. Skinner and his Walden 2, and I literally remember sitting in a psych class and hearing about this utopia and this place where, there were rewards and just various different things, and I said, that kind of sounds like heaven. And so when you get, if you get the book and when you read it, I literally juxtapose Walden 2 in terms of some of the attributes that Skinner, who was a behavioral psychologist, what he outlines with John the Revelator and some of the aspects of heaven. And I just put them together side by side. You read it, you see what your conclusions are. And there's some, concepts like that similar with philosophy and with Plato. It's like grabbing for, principles that have come from a faith perspective or from the Bible, and they don't label it as such, but I can clearly see the overlap. Again, going back to what I said earlier, science and faith do not have to be in opposition to each other. They can coexist. Author and doctor, researcher that I cited in my book was Dr. Joe Martin. He wrote the book, The Evolution of a Creationist, a layman's guide to the conflict between the Bible and evolutionary theory, which I think is a fascinating read. I would encourage you to read that, particularly for those who are agnostic or atheists. Read it. It's a different book to help open your mind possibly to a different perspective, and not just if you're agnostic or atheist. If you just want to have a continual informed view about faith and science, it is a wonderful book to read. And so as we draw nearer to the conclusion of the book, as well as this presentation, chapter 6 and chapter 7, I talk about what does the Bible say about mental illness. I present case scenarios from the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament is considered the books of the Bible that document how God dealt with his people before Christ was born. And then the New Testament is documentation after Christ was born and his ascension, his going back to heaven. So I present case scenarios on individuals that had, mental health presentations. And again, it's pretty amazing to see that there really is nothing new in terms of how people feel, how people function when they're under mental distress, whether it's presentations of schizophrenia to suicidality, that the Bible has, or depression, anxiety, that it literally has the features of the symptomology represented in the book there. One of the things that I really like that I offer in chapter 7 is not just the symptomology for someone to say, okay, I can see where, someone, can meet this criteria from a biblical perspective, but there's also a chart in there that gives suggestions. Again, I can't tell you what to do, but give suggestions on scriptures that you can read to apply to help you with what you're feeling. Okay, so as an example, Philippians 4 and 8, the Bible says in other words, the Apostle Paul encouraged people to think. Okay, so that's talking about the mind, to think on things that are honest, that are just, that are pure, that are lovely, that are of a good report, if there's virtue and if there's praise. So the way that the chart is constructed is that if someone's dealing with anxiety, there's a scripture reference for it, and then there's another chart that says, hey, if you're dealing with this particular emotion, emotions are normal. I referenced that earlier, that guilt is a normal emotion. So I am not saying that the goal is to never feel an emotion again. Although I will say in the book that I purchased here, there is a fascinating devotion. It's called Emotions and Energy, where I talk about a study that I did on how Jesus used his emotions, and he aligned his emotions to be used for the kingdom of God, meaning he did not use them carnally. When Jesus became angry and flipped over the table, he didn't flip it over because there wasn't food in the temple for him to eat. He didn't flip it over because, you know, somebody didn't do his hair the way he wanted them to. He flipped it over, and I'm saying those things to be funny, just to, you know, have some humor in it. He flipped the table over because they were disrespecting God. So every emotion that he felt was God centered. He did not, you know, become angry with people because, you know, he wasn't married yet. He did not become angry with people because he didn't have anywhere to live. He became angry when people lacked faith. Everything about how he used his emotions aligned with the word of God. So think about it very simply. If we aligned our emotions to only be utilized, or trained our emotions to only be utilized or manifested when it was related to the will of God, as opposed to, you know, our own carnal desires, meaning things that we may want that have nothing to do with God's will, how decreased would anger, depression, anxiety, how decreased would those things be? A lot of times when people are angry, they're not angry because, you know, all of the sin that's in the world. You know, people are angry because they didn't get something, because they're hurt about something. And I'm not taking away from that, but I am saying that it is important to be able to train one's mind. Remember the scripture that we started with all thy getting, get an understanding. So we want to understand that our emotions do have a purpose, but they are supposed to function. God intended them to function in a particular manner. They're not exclusively supposed to be used carnally. Yes, we have emotions, and we're not going to be able to get rid of that, but we need to discipline ourselves and train our emotions, train our mind to be used in a way that is consistent with how God intended for them to be used, and not just carnally whenever, you know, we are upset about something. We have to train ourselves to think differently so that we can feel differently and act differently. Um, we Christians don't have to trade off their faith when they want support. Okay, so a Christian does not have to say, well, you know, I don't want to acknowledge God because I need to come to this clinician from help. Okay, so that's another point that I make in chapter 6 and chapter 7, is that again, it is incumbent on the clinicians and the educators to make sure that the content is getting out, the clinicians to make sure that they're doing their due diligence. And so if you're a clinician watching this video, you know, you're charged with the responsibility to educate yourself as much as you can. If you, like me, were trained and you weren't necessarily trained on how to meet a particular faith of a particular client, then you have to go out and you have to do the research so that when you have a particular presenting client, if it's a Christian, you have some idea of what that means to them, not just what you've grown up thinking, or, you know, understand what does it really mean to them. So let the Spirit of a Sound Mind, let this book be a beginning point to help give you some insight on as to what it may look like for that particular client that you are working with. So when clients come to the door, it is our responsibility to make sure that we reduce any barriers that may present itself. You know, it takes a lot for clients to make a call, to go online, to say, I need this help. So when they actually have enough courage to do that, we need to make sure that we are as prepared as possible to meet he or she where they're at. And the point of this presentation in this book is that a part of meeting that client where he or she is in regards to their faith. Chapter 8 concludes with, so what's next? So where do we go from here? I've been lacing that throughout this presentation. Where I think we should go from here is continued research. I think we need advocacy at the collegiate level. So if you, again, are, you know, in any kind of leadership role at a university or a college, I submit to you that it is necessary to make sure that there is content that is comprehensive and that is reflective of the needs of the community that you serve, whether it's the educational community or whether it is the literal geographical community that your potential and prospective students are going to be clinicians in. If you are a clinician, you can do a survey of your clients to try to understand what their needs are. You know, it doesn't just have to be limited to faith, but that's obviously the focus of this particular presentation. You know, you want to be able to understand what meaning is driving your client. If your client has a viewpoint that's so different from what you've identified in the treatment plan, your treatment plan gains are not going to be actualized. And what's the good in terminating a client if they really didn't meet their treatment gains? I've never been the type of clinician that I was, just happy for clients to just show up for a therapy appointment. And in my therapy sessions, my motto is, in therapy, we do therapy. And so if your clients have a viewpoint, if they really believe that a part of why this is happening to them in terms of their clinical presentation is because they have somehow sinned or they've done something wrong, you need to know that. The APA, the American Psychiatric Association, one of the clinical structured interviews that I use from them, they asked, the meaning of, so what does your presentation, what do you think the causes of are your presentation? That's a way of trying to understand what's your viewpoint, what's your vantage point, why do you think that's happening? And so once your client, if you ask your client that question, and if they answer it, and it's from a perspective of, I've sinned, or I think this is a punishment, you don't want to just say, well, no, that's not it, because maybe it is it. I'm not demonizing people that deal with issues, but when you read the book, you'll understand that violation of some spiritual principles really can have certain retributions. I can't get into the heaviness of that. Maybe that will be for a future presentation, because it really goes, you can do just a whole presentation on that. That's beyond the scope of what I intended for this to be. But on a more simplistic level, even if you don't buy into it, you still need to understand what meaning it has for them and speak the language that is going to be most effective for them. Again, if you are in New York State, anywhere in the state, I can be of service to you as a clinician if you are so interested. So this concludes the presentation for today. Again, I want to say thank you for viewing it. I want to encourage you to get the book, to read it, reach out to me if you have questions about it, and certainly if I can be of any assistance to you clinically. Some national supports that you can turn to. I said that I was going to give you that, so just allow me to pull that up. If you are dealing with any kind of thoughts of self-harm, there are organizations that are willing to service you, that are willing to help you. So I just want to leave you with some of that. You can contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. That's 1-800-273-8255. Contact them if you're dealing with that. If you are in New York State, you can contact Crisis Services to understand if they provide support in your county. That number is 716-834-3131. There are supports that are available to you. So again, thank you for your time. Be well, and I pray that this presentation helps you in practical ways that will bring you to your highest level of yourself. Have a great day.